Hello, everybody. So welcome back to our Bhagavad Gita introductory series. Of course, with us today is Michael Bohuslav, and we are in chapter 2, and this will be our session 2. We're going to have 3 sessions on chapter 2, so next week will be the concluding session. So whether you're joining us to learn about self-improvement and to understand yourself better, whether you're here to understand this beautiful spiritual text, the Bhagavad Gita, or whether you've got self-realization and enlightenment firmly in your sights, we hope to share some insightful teachings and conversation. So welcome, Michael, and over to you to launch us into the next part of our Bhagavad Gita introductory series.
Oh, hello, Jackie, and a very warm welcome to all of our listeners. Lovely little introduction, Jackie, well done. So last week we transitioned from the actual battlefield to the internal battle which all humans will eventually face, the battle between the small self, which we call the ego, and the battle between the higher self, which we call the buddhi. So the exercise for the week was to reflect deeply on how you were feeling. Did you want to make significant changes in your life? And did you have the courage and the will to do so? How did you go? You might have thought that that was a huge decision you had to make. But in essence, the choice was very simple. 1, you decided everything was pretty okay in your life as it is, and you were happy to carry on as usual and rejoin the other 90% of the world's population. And good luck to you all in that. Or 2, you decided a new direction in life would serve you better, and you felt you had the will and the courage to continue on. So congratulations to you all. You've just won what's called the jackpot of the lottery of life. A lot different, obviously, to the jackpots of Tats Lotto, where we win $50 million or $100 million. This is a totally different jackpot, Jackie, that I think all our listeners have some understanding of. So if you stay with me over these coming podcasts, when I share you the teachings of Krishna and his great works, the Bhagavad Gita, I'll share with the spiritual wealth that you've just won over the coming podcasts. So we're not talking, obviously, money, dollars and cents here. We're talking spiritual wealth, which is more important, we'll come to realize if we haven't already, than anything else in our lives. So we need to understand that very few people have reached this point in their lives. The Gita refers to it beautifully in one of the passages where it says the human birth is, firstly, it's rare to obtain. And among thousands of men, scarcely one strives for perfection. And of those who strive and succeed, scarcely one knows me in truth. So it's starting to broaden it out, Jackie, into big numbers and little numbers. So the people that are listening, I'm including them as the one per chance who are interested and are striving and looking in this area. Buddha himself puts it beautifully as well, but it's worth doing the two comparisons. And if nothing else, just to illustrate again, that all these great masters are sharing the same message, just saying it slightly differently at different parts of the world in different eras. So the Buddha is alleged to have said that rare it is in the universe to born into a human body. We tend to take our births just for granted, but the masters tell us that it's a pretty rare thing to have a human birth. And so if it's rare, we should treasure that or be aware of that and utilize it to its fullest potential. So he goes on to say, rare it is, so he says, rare is in the universe is it to be born into a human lifetime. Rarer still is it to hear of the Dharma, the universal teaching or the universal truth. Rarer still is to accept this teaching. Rarer still is to act on the teaching. And then rarer still is to realize the truth of the teachings. So to even hear of enlightenment, Jackie, is already the rarest of gifts. Anyone who has ever heard of enlightenment will never be satisfied with anything else. And if you haven't heard of enlightenment before, well, you've certainly heard of it now. So that's the end game. But Jackie said in the introductory comments that this teaching is for everyone at any stage of their life or at any stage of their journey. So whether you're just a beginner and it's all new, but you're interested, well, you fit into this category of being one of the rare people who have heard of it or interested in it and are prepared to listen or explore it in any sort of way. So I'd just like to quickly show one of my diagrams, Jacqui, in my book.
Yes.
I mentioned this book in I think the first podcast. There it is there. There's my great name down here, Spiritual Philosophy, an illustration of ideas. And these are all the great masters that I've studied and helped me put these sorts of diagrams into place. And the diagram I particularly want to show is one of the very earliest ones I did. I'm trying to see if you can see it. It's called Searching. Can you see that, Jacqui?
We can see that.
Yeah.
The edge of the book needs to come in just a fraction so that the image is more flat to the screen. Yes.
That way?
Yep.
Yeah,
Yep.
okay, thank you. It's a bit hard for me trying to see
Yes.
at the screen. But you can see I've got the heading Searching. It's 8 billion people that's represented in that circle. It was 6 billion when I did it about 25 years ago. In that time, another 2 billion souls have entered the earth. And you can see the two smaller circles in the middle. Well, the bigger of those two small circles and the figures in there are representing all 8 billion people on the planet. And they're all heading towards the center because it's a natural part of a human, a seed in there that's all seeking truth. Just all the people in the bigger area haven't woken up yet, and they're just fully immersed in life and worldly activities. That first bigger circle towards the middle is the people that I've referred to there that are searching. And then in the yellow spot right in the center is like the bullseye, a target there. And that's the people who eventually achieve self-realization. Now, the diagram's difficult to draw because it's not drawn to scale. If I drew it to scale, the bigger of the two circles inside would be like the top of a pinhead, and the little bit in the middle would be like the point of a pin. But it'd be difficult to see the diagram, Jacqui. So maybe that just could help people understand diagrammatically the rarity of waking up in this lifetime. And that's why it's called the jackpot. It's a great prize, and it's a great people need to understand that it's that they've earned it over many lifetimes. It doesn't just happen by accident or willy-nilly. So the people who are listening have earned the right. They've won this jackpot, this great prize, and need to understand it's a privilege to have put yourself in that position. And having done that, utilize the remaining years of your life to strive for that eventual goal. But leaving that aside, just understand that every bit of knowledge you get and every bit of practice that you apply to that knowledge is going to make a huge difference in your life and make you a better, healthier, more contented, more relaxed individual, which would be great for you individually, but it'll be great for everyone that you know, and in actual fact, great for all of humanity as well, because you'll be putting out very fine energy as you're doing that. All right, Jacqui?
Yes.
Anything you'd like to say at this point?
Well, I'm glad to hear, and I suspect some of our listeners will be pleased to hear also the reassurance of little bits, incremental learning being useful, because and I suspect for you and I, we're at different stages of life, clearly based on age, but also given our duties and obligations in the world. I think for some people, like if I think of perhaps my peer group and yoga students that I know, everybody's so busy just surviving life. They're still raising families, a lot of them. They're working. They might have very best intentions to be curious about this sort of knowledge, and they like the idea of self-improvement. But personally, I don't know too many people, even though I know a lot of yoga and meditation teachers who would be prime candidates. I don't know a lot of people that hold the active intention to be realizing their true self. So I think the reassurance that even if you're just improving life slowly, surely by surely, is beautiful. And for those that are deeply passionate and do have their eyes set on being determined to do whatever they can to realize their self and reach enlightenment, that's fantastic. But I think for me personally, it's comforting to know that the learning journey, however slow and meandering it might be, serves great benefit and great usefulness in and of itself.
Yeah, very nicely put, Jackie, and I concur with that entirely. So it's a slow step-by-step journey. The actual fact, it takes many lifetimes, so I'm not expecting or suggesting anyone get overexcited, but I feel that I need to paint like a total picture so that anyone that's more advanced is also encouraged to pursue that more strongly. But I clearly understand the majority of the listeners by far will be just simply their main aim will be to improve the quality of their lives. And I've got the advantage, Jackie, with the year-wise over you and all the younger people on the planet. And that is that I've lived sort of like two lives. And I've lived that mortal life fully until almost the age of 50. And then, you know, personally, that then there was a huge transformation that took place for me there when I re-embarked and woke up, reawoke, and continued on my journey. And so I can relate these teachings to you know, people like myself who actually had to start from scratch, from base one, and then, you know, be of some help also to others that have been doing this for many years and sort of, you know, wanting to take it to that other level. So one of the parts of teaching is you're trying to cater for different levels of people's journey. But we do the best we can. So Swami Ramadas, one of the great philosophers, describes what we've just been discussing beautifully in this little passage, and I'll read it out. He says that you know, the joy of rising to this challenge in life. We've decided we're going to fight and we want to make some fundamental changes. And he tells us that there's great joy in that, and there's also going to be great rewards that comes. He says all the disturbances in our physical, mental and emotional aspects are due to the lack of knowledge. And I've stressed that continuously over all the podcasts so far, that the only thing that people need, or the main thing, is new knowledge, which will set us off on this new direction. And this new knowledge will bring about, due to the lack of true knowledge, which brings about all the confusion and chaos in our minds. There's no greater victory, he says, in the life of a human being than victory over the mind. Therefore, to conquer the mind through the awareness of the great truth that pervades all existence is the key to success and the consequent harmony and peace in the individual and in the world. The true soldier, he says, is not one who fights the external, but the one who fights the internal foes. So the battle now, we've gone right off that battlefield situation, and we're talking about the situation within us. In a similar vein, Jesus, one of our great philosophers in the Christian tradition, he says the truth shall set you free. So exactly the same comment, that this new knowledge, this truthful knowledge, will set you free. And we could spend a number of podcasts just picking apart those words in that quote. The masters in general tell us that the wise man watches the movement in his mind. So Jackie, I'd like, have you got anything you'd like to add there, or will I just continue on?
I think continue on, but I think it's an excellent point, and most people can relate. You know, we all often feel our own worries, our anxieties, the internal kind of combustion or concern for situations in life. We all know that. So yeah,
Yes.
I think it's something that resonates.
Okay. So what I'd like to do now, Jackie, is briefly recap the first few podcasts that we've done so that the listeners can get their bearings, because we've sort of been hopping around a fair bit, which will be done with when we finish this chapter. And then it'll just go to a steady pace of each chapter, focusing on one particular part of the teachings. So firstly, we looked at the historical background of to the Gita, where I outlined, you know, just some information on the Gita itself, seeing as people were going to be spending a lot of time studying it. In the first half of chapter 1, we looked at the two opposing forces and their qualities in the great battle of life. And then in the second half of chapter 1, we observe the mighty warrior Arjuna descend into a quivering mental and emotional specimen of man. And now in the first 10 verses of chapter 2, Arjuna is recognizing the wisdom which resides within his good friend Krishna, and is beginning to have some awareness that if he could tap into that same wisdom, it would change his life forever. And this is what we're doing. We're all tapping into Krishna's wisdom in the teachings. I've got some quick quotes from 3 of the Gitas. Swami Satchidananda, in his Living Gita, puts it this way. He said, this Kurukshetra battle didn't happen just some time thousands of years ago. He says it's constantly happening here in a constant struggle between good and bad. It's within each of us. If the good tendencies will allow their conscience, their buddhi, to guide them, they can have a grace of friendship of the Lord, and they can win the battle of life. These are powerful words, Jacqui. And Eknath Iswaran in his Gita, the Gita for Daily Living, puts it this way. He says to discover the Lord within is the supreme purpose of life, worthy of our time, energy, resources, effort, and dedication. For most of us, pain and suffering are necessary to make us grow up. And he talks about that God knows that human beings only understand one language, and that's the language of pain and suffering. So in essence, what that means is when we get to a stage in life where pain and suffering, mental, emotional, financial, whatever, a lack of spirituality, they're all sort of what are referred to as areas of pain and suffering in a human being. In other words, something that causes us unrest and unhappiness. And he says, that will eventually bring people to our listeners. They've gone through that in one stage or another, or in one form or another, and they're now wanting to access this knowledge, knowing that it'll, or hoping and also knowing deep down that it'll help eliminate all of that. And Parthasarati, he tells us in his Bhagavad Gita that the text begins with the word Dharma. That was the word used in Buddha's teachings, the Dharma, and ends with the word Mama. So he's narrowed it right down to that entire teachings of 18 chapters, Jacqui, in the Gita, 700 verses, beginning with one word and then ending in 18 chapters' time with the last word. And he says the first word in the Gita is Dharma, which, sorry, I've mentioned that, didn't I? And ends with the word Mama. So Mama means my, and Dharma means essential being. So the two words joined together obviously mean my essential being. So it signifies the theme of the Gita, that the purpose of life is to realize one's essential being, to discover the supreme self within, and to attain spiritual enlightenment. But as we've discussed already, Jacqui, along the way, there's small steps for everyone, but that is the ultimate goal. So all of those great masters there, plus everyone else, tells us that the purpose of our life is you can have marriage, have children, husbands, wives, jobs, careers, houses, all of that sort of stuff. They're all essential. We all have to have those. We understand all that. But understand that they're not the most essential and most important aspects of your life. That according to the great masters, the most important thing in our life is to become better human beings and eventually become realized human beings. But all this will be explained more fully as we go along. So on the eve of the great battle, the mighty warrior Arjuna came to realize that the battle was for his own soul. That's so significant. We need to understand that. It might be difficult, but try and start getting your head around the concept that this battle that you're fighting is for your own soul, for your own freedom, because you'll come to understand there's a lot of bondage involved in our lives at the moment that we're not aware of. And we will become aware of it because it'll be spelled out clearly. And the more we become aware of it, the more we realise we've been sucked into this by some unknown force. And we'll come to understand what that unknown force is. It's called the ego. And then we have an enemy that we know that we're battling with and that we can combat. So this great teaching that you're now partaking in will be invaluable in your own journey. Okay, Jacqui?
That's lovely.
You
I
in it?
think we're all keen to learn more.
Okay, so I'll continue on then. In verse 11 in chapter 2 of the Gita, this is the critical turning point now in the whole book. So Arjuna's woken up and he's realized he's got a friend next to him there, Krishna, and that's we're coming to realize that friend's within us, and it's called our higher self or our buddhi. And so Krishna begins now his teachings because Arjuna is ready to listen, ready to absorb. And I sense that, or I know that if people are listening, that they're in that same position. They're wanting some truth, and they understand one way or another it'll be very beneficial for them. So the Blessed Lord said, this is the actual teaching in Shloka 11, he said, "You have been grieving for those that should not be grieved for. The wise grieve neither for the living nor for the dead." His very first teaching is talking about life and death. Okay, and I'll elaborate obviously on that a bit. So in the Gita, you get that quote. That's the teachings of Krishna, and then the commentators do an explanation, a page or 2 or 3 pages, depending on how much is in there, to help us understand what that is. So I've summarised a little bit what some of that means. So he says, the understanding of it is that so far Arjuna, which is us, has been totally focused on and confused by physical death. Who's killing who? I'd rather die than kill my cousins, he says. Remember all of that in the battlefield scenario. And the correspondingly killing off of his subtle aspects regarding his erroneous mental thinking, emotional feelings and behavioural patterns. So we have Arjuna's got erroneous understanding of those aspects, as have most individual human beings on the planet. They all know they've got a mind, they all know they've got emotions, and they all know they're behaving in certain ways. But there's a lot of confusion as to, most people think that everything they're doing and thinking and saying is right. But then they get sad and angry and upset. Well, something's not right if that's happening, isn't it, Jacqui? So we're looking at, how we're expanding now on all of that. So Sri Krishna immediately cuts to the chase, no mucking around. In the next 20 verses of chapter 2, he's teaching Arjuna what's immortality and what's death, what's real and what's not real, what's called illusion, what's permanent, what's impermanent, what's changeless, what's continuously changing. So he's alluding clearly to the fact here that there's things in our lives that we're focusing on that really aren't real, but we think they're real. And so we give it a lot of attention and a lot of time and energy. And what we're needing to do now is come to understand what is real and what is permanent and start diverting some of that time and energy into this other aspect. Yeah. And we'll be, I'll refer to a handout later on, which will describe that more clearly. Just checking the time, Jacqui, we're sort of marching on nicely. So he explains that it's only the body of the individual that dies. He says death is certain for those that are born and birth for the dead. So he started to introduce here now the cycles of birth and death, Jacqui. Most people have got no idea really in the Western world about any of that. So he says, he tells him clearly that the self, the soul within, is indestructible and it's eternal. He introduces the concept that we have many lives, referred to in great works as either life cycles, the wheels of birth and death, reincarnation, re-embodiment. Any of these terms are all saying the same thing. In the Western world, it's not really part of our culture and part of our teaching. So most people just feel there's one life and that's it. But in half of the world's population, they have a clear understanding of this concept of the wheels of birth and death. And I'll show a diagram, either this, probably not this podcast, but maybe next podcast that'll help illustrate that. So he goes on to say, in expanding on that, that human beings constantly pass through the repeated stages of the unmanifest, the manifest, and again the unmanifest. Now that can sound heavy, Jacqui, I understand, but it's out there for certain people. But he simplifies it, or makes it more simple. We'd understand that it's being born, not born, born, not born. So that gives the idea and an easy way to understand life cycles or reincarnation. Or life, death, life, death, life, death. These are continuous cycles that is being referred to. And the saying is that if you don't want to die, well, don't be born. We could spend 100 podcasts on that sentence. I won't elaborate now, but it'll unfold a bit more as we go along. But it's something to sort of keep in mind, even if you don't understand it fully, or even if you don't accept it. If you persevere, you'll get to understand more of these concepts. So here Krishna is explaining clearly to Arjuna, and that's us, that it's a pointless grieving over these constantly changing life cycles, when the indwelling self, our true self, remains forever the same. So I'd just like to show at this point, Jacqui, a diagram, and then I'll give you the opportunity if you want to add anything there or make some comments. And again, it's can people see that? Can you see that, Jacqui?
I think so.
Yeah.
Just take it back away from the screen a fraction. Oh, yes. Okay, come back in. I just want to make sure we had it all. You can bring it in a little closer.
Yeah. So what I'm really wanting to show is the three figures. So this is in the reference to what we're talking. This is the body made up of 5 elements, and it's born and dies. Okay. That's I'll expand on that in a little bit more. Another part of us, this is all us, the 3 parts. And I showed that in the early diagram when I referred to the 3-story building. That's the first floor, that's the second floor, that's the engine room, and that's the 3rd floor with the higher self. So this one never dies, it's permanent. I've already referred to that. This one constantly dies, lifetime after lifetime, reborn, dies, reborn. This part here is, I'm going to expand on it, is like a computer program. A USB stick, I refer to it in my groups. That's the engine room. That's where all the changes that we're talking about now are taking place. Nothing much takes place here because all of this just reacts to what's happening here. And no change takes place here because that's perfect and complete. So the work is in this area here. All right. It's a quick showing of the diagram. It's a bit hard, I know, to see, but I think people could probably see that to some, and get some idea of a diagram. The book subtitle is "A Picture Tells 1,000 Words." So at this stage, Jacqui, what have you got anything you'd like to say there and simplify?
Yes, well, no, I think you explained it all very beautifully. The only thing that was occurring to me as you're explaining that is I'm thinking of the much younger generation, like a lot younger than me again, maybe even people in their, 20s and early 30s, is that they've grown up in very different times. They've grown up, even if they don't believe or have an understanding of words like soul and reincarnation and life after death and consciousness, they've heard all of these terms. Whereas for me growing up, and I'm 50 now, and for you, Michael, you're 80, like we didn't hear these terms growing up. So I'm just a little bit excited in that there's generational change, even if people aren't necessarily applying themselves or are interested yet. They're growing up with language and concepts that are in the background that as they get older, might make it a little bit easier to tune into. The only other thought I had, or remembrance, was the other day I was at a coffee shop, and the young woman who was making the coffee and processing the payments, she sort of was apologizing to the person in the queue in front of me and just saying she must have made an error, and she's just laughing, saying, "Oh, I'm so sorry, my brain is not working today." But in that moment when she said that, I thought we all say those things about ourselves, don't we? Like, my brain is not working, or my this is not working, or there's a problem with my body, or whatever it might be. And it kind of begs the question, well, if that part of you, particularly the mind, which we give so much credit to and power and authority to, if that the workings of that are not you, that part is the part that's not functioning, it leads a natural inquiry as to, well, what is the self? What is the truth? If that part's not working, which part of me is aware that that bit is not working? So that might seem a distant sort of thing to draw in, but it just popped into my head as something that's kind of relevant, because sometimes, even if we're not particularly far on the journey, we've kind of had those moments where we're aware that some part of ourself is not the truth, but we're not yet really clear on what the truth is.
Well, that's again, you've raised a very excellent and pertinent point, Jacqui, and I'm glad you brought that up. So you posed the question, what's saying or what knows that my brain's not working? Well, what knows that is your higher self. But the tragedy of it, if you like, is that for most people, it's their spiritual awareness that's not working most of the time. And if we can use that example that you've just shared, of when you said, well, what part of me saw that my brain wasn't working, that's the higher self, that's your buddhi. And what all this teaching is, that I'm in the process now of discussing, and will be in all the podcasts, is to train ourselves to connect with that higher self, our true self, which is all-knowing, pure, and keep looking at our mind and our emotions and whatever, and asking the question, why am I doing this? Why am I saying this? Why has this sort of unfolded in my life? And that's the conundrum, and that's both the question or the problem and the answer as well at the same time. All right.
Beautiful.
But we've got a lot of work to do. But we've got 36 more podcasts or whatever to go. So we'll get there. Just got to persevere, listeners. It can't do it all in one or two podcasts, as you already, I'm sure, are aware. So, Jacqui, this is a huge concept that most people contemplate, full stop. Exactly what we're talking about and what I've already talked about. For some people, they're hearing for the first time the notion of life cycles. And it's quite difficult to understand for those waking up. And that who we think is really me, my body, my mind, my senses, my emotions, is not true. It's not real. It's an illusion. Well, that's going to come as a shock to most people. But don't worry, it'll unfold. And that who I really am is the self within, the eternal, unchanging, pure soul, which is enveloped or cloaked in this constantly changing body, mind, emotions. So see, one's permanent and one's constantly changing. Ask yourself, Jacqui, are you still mentally thinking of things you did the way you thought when you were 5, 15, 25, 35, 45? They've constantly changed, haven't they, over the years? So have your emotions, as well as your physical appearance. So everything's constantly in a state of what's called flux, a constant stage of change. What we're embarking on now is a fundamental change in how we view ourselves and the world around us. All of our problems as individual human beings come from identifying with the unreal instead of the real. So this theme will be constantly expanded on throughout the entire teachings of the Gita. So as I keep saying, don't give up. It'll all unfold, and you'll be humongously surprised and satisfied if you persevere. The greatest sin you can commit, in inverted commas, is to bomb out and say, oh no, this guy doesn't know what he's talking about, or it's too hard, or I haven't heard this before, so it can't be true, all of that sort of stuff. That's all egoic talk, and you need to overcome that. This is where courage is required. And so what I'm just making the mention here, what I've just said. Don't be too worried if it's sounding a bit confusing at the moment. It'll all become clearer in the course of time. And so, Jacqui, mindful of finishing up, but it's working out beautifully, because I've made reference. I want to read a handout, which is where we're at to now. So I'll just read a few introductory comments to it. and then read the passage, and then you've got something to add to that, and then we'll finish up at that point. So, so to help illustrate this point that I've just been making about you know, all these real and unreal and constantly changing, and births and deaths and cycles, it's all pretty confusing. But there's one chappie I came across, and I'm going to use his sheet that I've given as a handout to students over the years. So to help illustrate this more simply, I'll read from a handout I've given students. It's from a book titled Mysticism, A Study in an Anthology, The Perennial Philosophy by F.C. Happold. And it's an old book. Yeah, no, don't have to, nothing much there, but just like to show visually, you know, where I get some of these things from. They're all great masters. And he summarizes, it's not his work, but he summarizes beautifully the thoughts of the great mystics. You know, people like Meister Eckhart and those sorts of people over the centuries. He studied their works and then put them together into this lovely diagram. And I'll just hold it up, you know, for to show people. I've compiled this out of his teaching so I can make it into a summary, and so I'll just read it out. And again, be open, listeners, and just let it resonate, let it flow in, and let the power of the words do the work. So he says that the great mystics refer to that the nature of man is not a single but a dual one. He is not one but two selves. This is an entirely very important concept, that we are two human beings within the one entity. Firstly, he says, he calls it the phenomenal ego, of which the person is chiefly conscious of, the body, the senses, the mind, and the emotions. All people recognize that, and they say, that's me, which he tends to regard as his true self. Yeah, tends to regard. Then he goes on to talk about the non-phenomenal eternal self, an inner man, the spirit, the spark of divinity within him, which is his true self. So this is simplifying very clearly, isn't it? This whole concept of the two aspects of our being. One's called mortal and one's called divine or immortal. And we refer to that immortal part as most people understand. You mentioned the word, Jacqui, young people know. There's the soul. Some people call it the spark of divinity within me. Some sort of reference that there's a higher aspect within this body, which is a lower aspect. And then he goes on to say a couple of bullet points. It is, well, the mystics go on to say, it is possible for a man, if he so desires. You've got to have the desire for the truth. Yeah, this is why I congratulated the people at the start that decided to continue on their journey. They've got a desire, whether they recognise it fully yet or not, for the truth. And that desire, once it's activated, can't stop. It'll just keep wanting to build on itself and grow. So he says, possible for a man if he so desires. And another important part here, and is prepared to make the necessary effort, Jacqui. I've mentioned before, there's no such thing as a free lunch. God doesn't give out free lunches. Governments do, and media does, and church people do. All sorts of people give out free lunches, but God doesn't. He says, if you want to find me and connect with me ultimately, you have to be prepared to make some fundamental changes in your life. So it's going to require a necessary effort. With that goes courage and perseverance and resolve and any of those sorts of strong words. And he says it's the chief end of, they say it's the chief end of man's earthly existence to discover and identify with their true self. So Buddha said it, Gita says it, that's the purpose of life, to identify with your true self, your higher self. And by doing so, you'll come to an intuitive knowledge of the divine ground and so apprehend truth as it really is, and not as to our limited human perceptions as it appears to be. So the human side of us, our mind even, and our emotions and so on, are actually very, very limited, just to whatever they've read, whatever they've heard, whatever's happened in their lives. In other words, their personal life. These days we call it my lived experience. I'd like to see an unlived experience, but anyway, that's a different story. But so that's the work, listeners. That's the work to shift the identification from the mortal limited self to the immortal unlimited self. And you can't really, if you knew what the benefit of that was at the end, you will what's called hasten to the one alone at a very fast pace of speed. And hopefully over the coming podcasts, I'll maybe encourage you a little bit to get a wiggle on and keep on going. And so at the finish, he says, not only that, he'll enter into a state of being which has been given different names, and we've alluded to these over the podcast: self-realization, eternal life, enlightenment, and so on. So that's the end goal. But in between, like we keep stressing, Jacqui, there's steps along the way that will benefit the person enormously as they gain the new knowledge. So I'll finish there, and then after you've made your comments, I'll just, or if you like, I'll give the exercise for this week first, and then you wind it up.
Yeah, certainly.
Okay.
I'm just thinking, as you're saying all of that, no wonder that things like yoga and meditation have become so popular, because even for people that don't necessarily understand the depth of what's on offer, often when they attend those classes or practice those practices, they have moments or little glimpses into their truth or an internal stillness, something that perhaps they don't even have a full understanding of or language or parameters for, but a taste of something that keeps them going back because they like the feeling or the insight or whatever it might be. I mean, I'm sure we'll touch more on that as time goes on, but it just reaffirms to me why these practices have become so popular in Western culture, particularly even in the last decade, even though they've been around longer than that.
Yeah, well, see, again, you've mentioned a couple of times, Jacqui, and I'm just digressing here a little bit, but it's interesting. You've referred to younger people, and I get feedback from the people in the groups that also say that they're noticing that more and more younger people, because they've got obviously grandchildren and, other sort of things. At my age, I'm sort of pretty much, divorced from that those younger people. But even when I was at the chiropractor last visit, a young lady massaging me prior to the chiropractor doing his work, we just have a chat and that, and got talking, and I told her I was doing, she says, what are you doing? And I said, oh, I'm doing some podcasts with my daughter, and what on, and and meditation. I asked her if she meditated. She said, oh yes, she does, but she doesn't know much about it, but she'd like to meditate more, learn more on that. There's a whole chapter in the Gita on meditation, so if she ends up listening, she'll learn a bit there. But there's more on that around. And this, I asked the young lady how old she was, and she said she's 21. But what she does, which was the point I was really wanting to make, is she says, oh, she got all excited when we're having this bit of discussion. I guess most people just talk about the weather or something like that. But I'd take any opportunity I can to sort of throw out a few seeds here and there. And she said, I've got a pack of angel cards. And she says, every day I pull out a card, and it's got, affirmations. Everyone be familiar with things like that. Tarot cards, angel cards, there's a whole stack of one-day liners, 365 days. I got a beautiful book someone gave me, quotes from Buddha or Jesus or Krishna or whoever. And she said that that's how she starts off a day. So I took great heart in that here's this young lady, 21 years old, and first, to get her started, an angel card. You could just picture it, beautiful angels on there and some lovely writing on the bottom. And it's like her focus, if you like, an inspiration for the day. So that's beautiful.
Yes.
And I started to think, because we're going to release these podcasts shortly, Jacqui, and I'm thinking, I'll get in touch with some of the old students that have, moved to Melbourne or lost contact with or something. They might know someone that now that would be interested. And before I knew it, I'd written down 40 names of people, that I can contact, and people in my students in the group are all waiting for these podcasts to come out, and they're saying, "Oh, as soon as you give us the link, we'll tell people we know." So, I'm getting quite excited about the fact that, because as you know, I don't understand this technology very much, but I'm getting a sort of a strong, starting to get a strong understanding that it could be of interest to a lot of people that are listening.
Yes, I think it's different times for the younger generation, and the world is an intense place for people
Yeah.
that are dynamically involved on a day-to-day basis. I think people are looking for more understanding, better insights, certainly any tips that help live a better, healthier, happier, more in-tuned life. So
Yeah.
I think it's timely. I was just going to read, I know we've spoken a little bit. I've got a handout here that for those of you that do classes with my father, Michael, you will be well aware of this handout because I know it's one that he reads to you often. And many of you have probably seen this as a meme on social media, but it's a story of two wolves. And I'm just going to share it with you because it's just another nice contemplation. So it says, one evening, an old Cherokee told his grandson about a battle that goes on inside people. He said, "My son, the battle is between two wolves inside us all. One is evil. It is anger, envy, jealousy, sorrow, regret, greed, arrogance, self-pity, guilt, resentment, inferiority, lies, false pride, superiority, and the ego. The other is good. It is joy, peace, love, hope, serenity, humility, kindness, benevolence, empathy, generosity, truth, compassion, and faith." The grandson thought for a moment and then asked his grandfather, "Which wolf wins?" The old Cherokee simply replied, "The one you feed." So I suppose that is what, well, not I suppose, that is what we are doing here, understanding the parts of ourselves and which one we give strength and power to. But over to you, Michael. We have gone a little bit over time, but
We
closing
have,
words for today's
yes.
session.
Yeah. And so, beautifully put. But that gives, with the handout sheet I read from the great mystics, you've got the sort of highest aspect of that teachings. And what you've just shared with the listeners, Jacqui, is as simple as a story as you can get, but they're both exactly the same. They're both potent, they're both truthful, and they're both powerful. And anyone that's listening can get whatever out of those two, whatever they need. And so that leads me now to the exercise for this week. Jackie's asked me to give exercises at the end of each session, and I've been doing that. So the exercise for this week relates exactly to these last two aspects. The sheet I read out about the dual nature, and the story Jacqui just shared about the two wolves that are inside each human being. So the exercise I'd like to leave you with this week, listeners, is to ponder the best you can on your dual nature. What that is, your higher self, your immortal nature, and your lower self, your mortal nature. See if you can identify which of these two selves is operating at any stage in your daily life that you can remember to think about it. Ask yourself, was I just speaking then from my higher self when the conversation's finished, or was I speaking from my lower self? If you're speaking from your lower self, you've got self-interest in there, and it won't actually be as truthful as it could be. So a little bit of a difficult concept maybe, or whatever. Another way of that you could tackle it might be just you might like to jot down as you remember during the week, or what you think is your higher self, and jot down what you think is your lower self, which would be a list similar to what you read out there with the two wolves, Jacqui. So either probably the first option I gave you might be the better one. See if you can ponder, observe, reflect on which part of you, now that you're understanding pretty clearly that there is two parts, which we need to start looking at, recognizing which one. So when the young lady said at the cafe, my mind's gone blank or was not working, well, that's an observation of that's an example of what I'm talking about. All right. The higher self was observing the lower self, whose physical brain wasn't working at that moment, when he just simply forgot, to give the right change or where the person was. So we get distracted, and these are just normal things in life. Okay, Jacqui, well, I'll finish off there. We have gone well and truly over time today.
We have, but that's okay. Hopefully there's some interesting learning there for everybody. All right, well, thank you, everyone. Lovely to share with you, and Michael and myself will see you next week for part 3 of chapter 2. Take care, everybody.
Okay, goodbye, everyone. Thank you.